and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is being met with even in 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So this is the second night that we are speaking together during our full moon Sesshin, our creativity full moon Sesshin at Olympia Zen Center in July 2021. And we've had a busy day, and people are going about their projects and creating all kinds of interesting things. And so it's been a very fruitful day. And I'm grateful also to all of the work being done outside on our grounds, weeding and the trimming of the bushes. It looks very beautiful out there. And thank you so much for all that hard work, and also for the inside work and for the cooking and just everything that goes together for everybody in Sesshin. So maybe we'll just start out with questions tonight. That's usually the best meat of any of our conversation, what your questions are and what conversation we can have together. And so maybe some things have come up for you as you are trying to figure out how to say something and how to put together some idea of something. Something. Yeah. Yes, Del.
No,
Oh, sorry. I am like an auctioneer. Anybody just moves their hands a little bit, I'm on it. I'm on it. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Joan.
So this is about the ox herding pictures.
Yes.
And I always get a little confused with the ox herding pictures, because on the one hand, it seems like there starts out searching for the true self, but then they use words that seem to indicate that you're trying to tame your mind or trying to rein in your ego self. So it seems like it's going back and forth between these two ideas, but I don't know, maybe you can shed some light on that. It just seems like, I don't know, the metaphors are mixed.
Well, I wouldn't hold it too strongly. You know, this comes from China in the 12th century. And here we are with it translated over and over again by various people. And so, you know, we make do with the language we're given via translation. And I wouldn't make too much of it. It's a simple metaphor about practice and about awakening. And, you know, whether it's a question of, in some ways, we are taming ourselves. I mean, in some ways, we've come into practice fairly wild in our mind. And there is some taming of the mind, I think, that does take place, which I think is perfectly legitimate in relationship to the ego or even to one's life and what one might have been living that brought us to practice. And so I think the use of the word taming is legitimate, but I wouldn't worry too much about putting it too literally in some box. It's simply it's a fairy tale metaphor, really, is what it is. And it's an art piece, and I don't think we know who actually composed it. But it is 12th century. And at that time, Chan, of course, was underway, but Dogen Zenji is 13th century. Dogen Zenji is maybe even at that time that it was composed is in China himself. going back to Japan somewhere around that time. So I just wouldn't take it so literally that I try to arrest it so much. I'd hold it fairly lightly myself and let it be that this ox herder is finding his way in life, and the metaphor of the bull is there, and he finds his way and eventually makes his way back to the marketplace, fulfilled in awakening. I'd leave it at that and not try and arrest it in something, or not even to analyze it too much. So, but that's my feeling about it. I would hold it lightly.
Well, and then my follow-up question to that is, even though it's presented in a linear fashion, wouldn't you agree that the journey is more circular?
Absolutely. And many of us, maybe we got to number 10, as a metaphor again, in that lineage, and we just go back and start over again. The hero's journey is circular. And once we, get to something, we start again. And I will say that the beginning of the hero's journey is a very wide circle. And gradually we move in and get closer and closer so that the circle becomes a little bit more narrow. And so we're never finished. It's not over. And we see the ox herd go to the marketplace, but believe me, he's going to stumble again in some way. Something will happen that will test him yet again. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And the linearity of it, it's a fable, it's a narrative. And so it just follows that kind of pathway, because it's a poem and it's a story. So nobody's life is linear exactly, except maybe the hours are linear, and maybe by the time we are ready to die, it will look like our life has been linear, but there's not much about it that is exactly that way. It just isn't. Even our thoughts are not linear. We maybe if we're even telling a story, or we enter a poem, or we start a painting, or we start some artwork, we think that we're going in a particular way, and very soon the mind does something else, and the mind looks in another direction, and all of a sudden the painting evolves in another way. And the same in writing. We think we're going that way, and very quickly the mind switches and moves in all kinds of different ways. I mean, consider a conversation with a friend. There's nothing linear about it. Go from this subject to that subject. You might talk about world affairs, and in a few minutes later, you're talking about somebody you see on the street and the food that you had at some restaurant a week ago. I mean, it's how it goes. And there's not a lot that it really is linear. It's not, nothing is logical actually. So I wouldn't worry about that either. It's just a story. But it's a good methodology to give students something to make a problem over. So, I mean, you got to have something, you got to do something. So it turned out that the year of the ox turned out to be just a good example. So.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I love the story.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, it is. And the ox is a very sweet metaphor, but it is that. And there are so many other kinds of things that we could use. I was thinking of all kinds of things yesterday about metaphors, and I was thinking about a shovel. I was trying to think, could I draw a shovel? And in the beginning, do I have the shovel full or do I have it empty? Or so then you start digging with this shovel and there's just ucky mud on the shovel. And then after a while, mean, I was just playing around with that because you could make anything from fullness to emptiness, you know, and then you fill up the shovel again when you go back into the marketplace, you know. But that's just one passing example that I was trying to think about whether that would work. You can do it with anything. We move from emptiness and fullness constantly. That the mind in between thoughts is, of course, the mind is total emptiness anyway. But in the fullness of thoughts, in the pause between one thought to another, the mind is empty in that moment. Dogen says there's something like 4,225 seconds in a second in every moment. And so we have all of these minute moments that take place that we can't comprehend. And so the mind is doing emptiness, even though we don't recognize it because it goes by so quickly. But we have these pauses in our thoughts also, in which we just rest for a moment, don't think anything, and then we think again. Or we make sounds, or we make words. So. Yeah. Another one? Got another one to say? To bring another question from that? Yes. Yes, Kirsta. This is Kirsta speaking.
Hi, yeah, it's Kirsta, and I was wondering, I agree with you about, you know, when this ox herding story was told, and I wonder why do you think it has such enduring relevance to people over time? Why do people come back to it?
Well, I think there's a dearness about it. And I think it's a success story, for one thing, and we love success stories. I think that's one aspect of it, about, you know, that this one person comes from suffering and blindness in a way, and, you know, holds on to practice and struggles through, and then comes through successfully to understanding, to an awakening moment. And I think that that's what it is. I think it's the dearness of it, the sweetness, the sweetness, and the paintings are sweetness, and the poems, and I think that that's what it's about. And yeah, I that's how I'd see it. Do you have some thought about what you think might be the case for its sustaining ability?
The only thing that struck me was that when I first read it, it was not what I expected. You know, I expected that he would get control of the ox, and that would be the purpose of the story, and it goes beyond that. So
yeah. But it is. I mean, it's the story of the Buddha too. It's the story of any of the saints. I'm calling them saints, realized people in our ancestry. And so I think for that reason, it has enduring qualities that we don't like so much to point to particular people in our ancestry, although we do, we talk about their lives. But this is a way to really celebrate an anonymous story and to look at that realization in a way that we don't celebrate human beings' realizations, simply because, at least in Soto Zen, we don't talk about those so much. We don't talk about our awakening so much, even though I think we would be better off if we did. That if teachers actually spoke about their awakening experience. We have some teachers who are advocating that happen, simply because people don't know otherwise whether it's possible for them. So So there's a danger in it because people are liable to lionize such people and idolize them in some way because they express their awakening experience. But we have to be also realize that that was that moment. And it's true that at that moment, we see in a way that we have never seen before, and it influences all the rest of one's life. It doesn't mean that we stay in that Dharma position forever. As I say, that guy who went into the marketplace, something's going to happen and he's going to have to start over again. And the same with anybody who has such an experience, that one is tested again and again and is challenged by that experience. So, but we're inclined to not speak about it so much in Soto Zen. Rinzai speaks about it more openly, but, and there are even some teachers who think that Dogen didn't really have an enlightenment experience. He didn't have Kensho. It's just that we've lionized him. And I totally disagree with that. Dogen had clearly had an awakening experience. It's evident in the writing. But there are, pockets of practice who feel that he did not. But he went and practiced, and that because practice is awakening itself, that's what that is. I feel it was a specific enlightenment experience with Dogen, and I feel that that is the case with many teachers. So not all, but many. So in one sense, it does encourage students to know that, the teachers are people and they're not gods. There's nothing special. We do exactly the same practice, so there's no difference. And so, but there's the danger to lionize, and there is anyway with any teacher, that the student, the teacher can be truly made into something she or he is not. And we're inclined in America to treat the teacher with a little bit more, I don't want to say godlike quality. I want to say, qualities that they're to be perfect. And Japan doesn't do that. Much more relaxed about the humanness of the teacher, the human quality of the teacher. And we expect so much of American teachers that they're to be perfect in some way. And we don't allow teachers to be so human in America. You'd think the opposite would be the case, but it's not. It's not. Yes. This is Larry speaking.
Hi, Joan. In contemplating Dogen's understanding, there's 4,200 and more moments of emptiness every second. That's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
And so a standing question I have is, why is it so damn difficult to arrest the wandering mind?
It's not so difficult. It's just that you expect it to not wander. It's always going to wander. It's what the mind does. As I'm saying, there's no linearity about it. Embrace the wandering and allow it to be. To try to arrest it is the problem. It's always going to wander. And that's the joy of it, isn't it?
I guess it depends on your degree of neurosis.
I have a question kind of to that point.
Okay,
I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish there. I'm sorry.
I very much appreciate the response in terms of our thinking is so circular, so very circular. And it occurs to me that the objective is not to grasp those moments of emptiness, but to understand that they are there in terms of incremental enlightenment. And through our practice, we find those moments, and the more we find those moments, the more we express our Buddha nature.
Yeah, well, there you have it. Didn't need to ask. All set. Yeah, the wandering mind is beautiful. Why wouldn't you want the mind to know, to experience everything? Why wouldn't you want a full palette of emotion? To not want that is to draw oneself into a closet. And the world is wide, and it's there. The totality of the universe is all the myriad things coming forward. It is our awakening. So enjoy the mind, enjoy what the mind does. It's the most natural thing. Yes, Don. John, excuse me, John.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't take this the wrong way. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but
Yeah.
in Zen, there's some opportunity for looking at things that could be funny. But when you look at Dogen's writing, you have, I mean, yeah, I asked myself the question, is he on the autism spectrum? Because the detail that he went into and some of the things that he went on, the only people I know in my life who do that kind of thing are people on that spectrum. And that's not to take away from everything he's written and what he, all that he left us, but everybody's in some place on the spectrum of autism or not. And it strikes me as that he was, and that could be a good thing in terms of what he did, but to me, it strikes me as a possibility.
Yeah.
The way, I mean, some of the stuff, the minutia he got into, and in terms of how the monks were supposed to behave and conduct themselves on a daily basis, it's just about nothing he left out.
Exactly.
And the detail to which he went to was amazing. That's part of the reason I think he became, kind of what he left became so famous.
You have to understand that Dogen Zenji was establishing something entirely new, a practice that had not been seen before. Yeah, it just had not. Even different from China. He's bringing this into his own culture. In the beginning, he's not even believed. He comes back to Kyoto and he starts to tell what his experience has been in China, and they don't want to hear it. Nobody wants to hear what he has to say. And he finally gets drubbed out, and he goes up north into Fukui Prefecture and establishes Eiheiji. I think he is one more place before he gets to the final Eiheiji. But, it's like the Buddha. The Buddha had a band of unruly people around him, unruly monks who just were sloppy and awful and so forth. And the Buddha established precepts. The Buddha also established ways to conduct yourself. And the sutras are more minute than Dogen Zenji, believe me, in what they put forth in behavior and belief and so forth and so on. So Dogen is establishing a new way to practice that has not been seen before. And people were going in all directions. People go in all directions here in this small temple. And I sit and I watch and I think, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I think. Exactly what I think I get from it is that he was a man just like every other man.
Absolutely
he had his way
was.
of being, and
But
that's
he was
a fascinating thing about
he was
it.
also brilliant.
Oh,
He was
sure.
absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant man.
Yeah, but he was
And so he established these, and some of it comes via Eido and not via Dogen. Eido is writing down what Dogen said many times. And when you are instructing in something, you give very minute detail about how to do it. If you don't get it. You don't get the opportunity to perform. Excuse me for this example. Steve and I spent a very, very brief time just going through this small exchange that we had of the incense. but it was so brief and the detail was not detailed enough for us to be able to execute it. So you have to get into deeper detail. And then you find out, well, why do you do it that way? In America, we don't ask why. If you ask why in Japan, they say, do that for 25 years, and then you will see why you bow. Then you'll know, after 25 years, you begin to realize what bowing means. And it's the same thing about every single thing that we do. It's the same thing about oryoki, or about every detail that we have. And in any art, and I'm coming back to art, there is minute detail about how to mix your paint to get the exact color. There is minute detail about the editing of a poem. And so Dogen's details are pretty important because we're not going to get all of them. We're only going to get a smidgen of them. And he knew that. And that's true of any teacher. You get a smidgen of what the teacher is trying to say and is trying to get across. Because unless you are absolutely devoted to the practice itself, you get a smidgen because you don't spend every single day in practice. And so that's how it is. So the teacher can sound like she or he is being picky with these details. And that's because I know you're only going to get a smidgen. You're only going to get a little bit. Because maybe you're not going to bow for 25 years. Well, maybe you're not going to use oryoki for 25 years to find out why you hold the bowl the way you hold the bowl.
Isn't it impossible to get it entirely? And even if you could, it still would be different.
Absolutely. That is quite true. I mean, we are all bowing the same bow. And who looks the same? Nobody does. But through the minute detail, you come to the intensity of it. You come to the beauty of it via the minute detail. And it will always be different because we're all different. No two people bow alike. No two people sit zazen alike. Everybody looks different around the room. Everybody sits in a different fashion. Their legs are different. Some people's legs are way out here like this from behind, and then some people's are in like this, and all kinds of ways to sit. And so we're all different. So you're quite right. We'll never quite be the same. So you give what you can. Yeah. Oh, auctioneers.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So I mean, the teaching was so brief. We spent maybe 7 or 8 minutes together, and it's just because during this sesshin there was an opportunity to lift the ceremony up a little bit with a little bit more in it, and to allow lay to be deeper into the practice, into the ceremonies. So that's why I thought that would be great for Steve, because he'd never done it before. And so we rehearsed very quickly, but we'll do it more so that we get it. And it was very hurried, but and it's the same thing as Jisha. The position is Jisha. It's the most favored position in Zen practice because you're close to the teacher and you get to know the teacher very well, and you learn everything about the teacher and the teacher's style. And so it's the most favored position. And all the other monks will look to the Jisha to find out what to do and how to stay in good with the teacher, all that kind of thing. That doesn't happen here, but in the temple, in the Japanese temple, it's like that. And so the Jisha part is very difficult also because there's great jealousy around it, around that closeness to the teacher. In Japan, the Jisha takes care of the teacher's clothing, does the teacher's laundry, knows all the personal likes and ways and so forth that the teacher does, and it's a very, very close position. And so, so very favored. And not everybody ever gets to be Jisha. It just doesn't happen because one has to be very sympathetic with the teacher, and the teacher, I mean, there's great trust that occurs then between the Jisha and the teacher. So, so not everybody gets to be in that position. So jealousy arises around that.
Watch out, Steve.
He'll never do my laundry. It's okay. And if I were to have such a close Jisha, it would be a woman. It would have to be a woman. So yeah, but in the ceremony, the ceremony Jisha is different from the personal Jisha for the temple master. So so we have not had that. So so I accept Dogen's minuscule teachings. I don't listen to all of them because I can't possibly succeed in all of them. But
some of them are no longer relevant either. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
God.
Yeah,
Brushing
there is
your
that.
teeth and wiping your
Sure,
own
of course,
behind.
of course, of course. But, for his time to establish a monastic system, it took that.
Oh.
It took all of that.
Yeah.
He was a brilliant, and today, Shobo Genzo is probably the most revered spiritual text now of all time. We now have across our colleges Dogen studies, and you can get a degree in Dogen studies at numerous universities, which of course you can in Japan. But we have such a thing now in the United States, and it's growing. And Shobo Genzo is read by all people in all religions now. It's such an enormous text of practice, of spiritual training and practice. And there's, who can comprehend it all? When I was at Entsuji, Inoue Kondo Roshi came for the very first time, and I was there for 1 year of his teachings. And he began on chapter 1. And when I went back 25 years later, he was starting to get to the end of the book.
Wow.
It's about 1,500 pages. And so he just methodically took it page by page. And it was very outstanding. You don't typically get to teach Shobo Genzo until you are at least 70 years old, because the feeling is that you couldn't possibly comprehend it until you have that much practice behind you. But Inoue Kondo Roshi was 50 when he began teaching it, when he was permitted to teach. You have to be permitted to teach Shobo Genzo in Japan. And he was 50 because he had great enlightenment, and his father was Gien Inoue, who had very great enlightenment. And so Inoue Kondo Roshi was recognized as a very great enlightened teacher. And so, so to teach Dogen requires to really stand in the absolute with almost everything all the time. And you can feel that in Kondo Roshi. He doesn't allow the relative to enter. And this is where Dogen teaches from. He teaches from the absolute all the time. He never stands in a relative and says, yeah, I know how you're suffering, but it's not too bad. Never says such a thing. It's always on a pure level of the Dharma. So I, can understand. I've certainly heard people say, they've read certain sections of Shobo Genzo and they're horrified by the pickiness of it, about your fingernails have to be a certain thing and so forth, and how you clean your teeth, et cetera, et cetera.
And I never meant it to say that as if he was defective, because I don't think that people on that spectrum are defective. They just have a certain
Sure.
particular mental aptitude,
Yeah,
which can
okay,
be very useful in
Yeah,
some places
right,
and not
right,
always in others.
right.
I certainly don't think that's.
But
a
it's a
defect.
little bit difficult to say such a thing because of our understanding of that as a mental condition. So we should be
Some people
careful
do.
about it. Yeah.
Some people do.
And the same subject, isn't, I find such detail sometimes in other religions as well, as far as how to behave, and I mean, very similar in some ways. But I look at it, I mean, it depends on what you're gonna call minutia. Because what we have in Dogen are concentrated teachings. We're not living with Dogen. And the day-to-day sitting and work and so on, and what's written are these awakened, concentrated teachings, and it's like in Sesshin we have this opportunity for concentrated practice. I mean, it's almost a closed community for a while, and that allows us to really go deep and to embody the detail of practice. And for me, it's just such a wonderful opportunity to do that. And then we get the creative too.
To mess it all up. So it's, it's, for me, the enjoyment of it is to watch the Confucianism of this orderly process, and then the Taoist throwing it all apart and, throwing that into the mix, because those two in balance are really what are so great. So yeah.
When you say it, go be kindergartners,
Mm-hmm.
that's what kindergarten is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's that balance of
Yes.
learning how to be orderly
Mhm.
and how to still be a child.
Right. Had a crayon.
Mm-hmm.
not in a coloring book though. How to color outside the lines, how to just do art. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Ryokan-san was deeply playful, and yet he wrote the most exquisite poetry, and but deeply playful. And his playfulness was necessary in the midst of such great suffering of Japan at the time, not unlike our times, really. Terrible plagues, earthquakes, fires, and tremendous difficulty in the government in the time of Ryokan-san. So it's not terribly unlike what we have now. And so playfulness was deeply necessary in daily life, especially for the children, that they have some room to be children and that they could play and do things together. So, yeah. Playfulness is a deep virtue, an important virtue.
It's sad to me that we monetize playfulness.
Yeah.
And there are very few ways in which
This is Karen speaking.
our culture allows playfulness that isn't somehow commodified or captured to create other ends at the same time.
Yeah.
So childhood, I think, is so many people seemingly hold on to it, maybe what I might say too long in some respects, because we don't have ways for adults really we don't hold up ways for adults to be playful.
Yeah.
And so I think we tend to hold on to that childishness.
Right. So that difference between playfulness and childish, we can be very childish at times, all of us, but that's not what we're meaning. And we can be accused, in playfulness, we could be accused of childishness because people are afraid to see us as adults being playful. And so, yeah. That's why we have a picnic. That's why we celebrate in that way. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Nice thoughts, nice discussion, and nice questions and so forth. So. Hey, buddy. Yeah. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to become